Every single Monday, we chat with the TTPS, and this morning we want to welcome Inspector Michelle Lewis back with us this morning to chat about community policing and the philosophy behind it. Good morning, Inspector.
Good morning to you, sir, and good morning to all our listening and viewing public. It's a pleasure for us to be here once again.
It's always a pleasure to have you here. I like to ask hard questions, but I'm going to start with the planned topic this morning, which is the community policing philosophy.
Yes.
Tell me about it.
Right, so the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, the philosophy of community policing, has always been engraved in the organization. We can look back at when Winston Cooper was ACP, retired ACP. And for those of us who remember, he was the one that we saw in school and that kind of thing.
Right.
And then Derek Shabody with the Police Street Club. So the community policing philosophy has always been with us. But it changes as the time changes. And so as an organization, we want to encourage members of the public and give them that assurance that the police service is not just doing the suppressive, aggressive, reactive policing, but that we are also looking at ways to reduce crime, the fear of crime, and empower the community to live a life that is away and free of crime.
So does that mean then that there's special training that would go into how we treat the community when we're training police officers?
Say that again.
Is there specialist training? Is there a focused training on saying, all right, this is how we deal with members of the community, this is how we deal with people in general, like just general HR training, I guess?
Right, so, well, for a community, what we do is that we gather information. So we look at the intelligence gathering and look at what are the risk factors for a particular community. And we also look at what are the protective factors, so that some communities will have stronger, some have some good things going for them that we can use to work with. And then there are some communities that have not so good things work for them. And there's where we have to bring in the resources and the education and the enablement to be able to get those factors that would reduce their self-esteem, their self-worth, and to do things right.
Reduce the self-esteem?
Things that in the community that work to reduce the self-esteem, particularly of young persons, to think that I cannot do better, I cannot accomplish anything more, and so they look at an alternative, which in most cases is a life of crime.
Right. What are some of those factors that you look at when in trying to determine which communities have what? Because I know you're saying that there's things that reduce, but I mean, if we look at, there are some communities that I drive to and I swear nobody living there, everybody locked up inside the house for whatever reason. And then you have communities that have the community spirit where you drive to and you see everybody talking to each other, neighbors by each other, by the parlor or whatever. How do we determine which communities? What is the form of intelligence gathering that we use?
Right, so even though you may see, because there are some communities where you would see a lot of networking.
Right.
And the networking may not always be positive. Because we have some communities where that network works well for gang activities and gang-related matters, right? And of course, there are some communities, affluent communities, where you drive through and you see everybody into themselves. It doesn't mean that nothing is not happening there.
Right, so that's what I'm asking.
Just
how
not
do we
being reported.
So how do we know? How do we gather the intelligence?
So one of the things that the police do is that we do walkabouts, we do walkthroughs. We engage the community through police town meetings. We look at the data from the organization and see where, for example, where we have a risk factor taking place, where, for example, by a particular corner, we are seeing a lot of persons being pickpocketed, or a lot of persons, young children, their cell phones are being taken and that kind of thing. Or, for example, in a community, you would hear things that are not reported, right, that there are some domestic matters happening in an area, and so we use the opportunities to go in and speak generally with targeting and, of course, giving information of how they can get help. So we look at gathering information of what instances would affect a community. So, for example, we have areas where they may have problems with water. It's not a police issue, but it's a situation that we can call an agency, WASA, for example, to assist. They may have situations where garbage collection and that kind of health, hygiene and hazard is a problem. And so when they see the police working towards not just the crime aspect, but the entire being, they feel that, they get that feeling that we are not just there to lock you up, but we are there to help you. And that is the message that we want to send.
Is there a difference between, I mean, in my community, for example, right, like when I see a police jeep pass, and they have different types of police jeeps that is passed, right? They have the ones that, people dressed in proper police attire that we know and we can recognize. uniformized, and then they have the ones that just come in the full kit of black. You have the ones that just come masked up. They have various types. I mean, I know they have different branches dealing with different things, right?
Yes.
So in a community, how are we to identify which ones we can stop and ask for help about? Things like, I ain't getting no water this week, I ain't getting no water for the last month, I don't know if I can do something for me. Like, how do we know which police to stop, or is it that we can stop all and ask questions? And
so generally, a police officer on duty, you can stop and ask, particularly in a marked police vehicle, because as you know, we would have police undercover and unmarked vehicles and that kind of thing. But of course, even in those vehicles, people know, because CID use unmarked, and people still know these.
Everybody know the unmarked. Everybody know the unmarked.
Right? So, for example, in a community where, for example, somebody would want to know, can I approach a police officer and can I ask them something like this? Generally, the uniform, as we know, is the blue and grey.
Right.
That is what we call patrol order number 2.
Right.
And that is the everyday uniform. And then you have the tactical, which is the blue, which is for more, operational.
This is the navy blue. Top to bottom navy blue. Right.
Full navy blue. But with the navy blue, it's operational. But generally, what everybody kind of gravitate to more is the gray and blue.
Right.
And in the case of women, full blue.
Right.
And so in every community as well, you have community policing officers or community policing unit. That's not to say that all police officers are not. But there are some instances and some circumstances that the reports and matters will be directed to community police to further,
they have a focus on the community.
And that kind of thing.
They are more specialists.
Right. So in every community, in every police division, there are community policing officers. And within that community or within the division or district, you will have police youth clubs. And those police youth clubs are generally run or managed by community policing officers.
Okay.
So that is one easy point where someone can just get to police in quick time in terms of somebody that they think, is more on the ground kind of thing. We also have the E99 ERP officers who are there on patrols, and they will do, general patrols. You will see them in tactical, but you will see them doing general policing. And so where you see those officers too, when you want to ask and, like, where can I get information of that and that and that and the other? And they will be able to direct you. They may not treat with it because they would be on a particular beat and patrol, a particular area that they focus in on, but they will certainly be able to direct you.
Okay. You mentioned on-duty officers who are, patrolling and you see them or whatever. But most times, like you said before, people know the unmarked, the vehicles, and you see when you see a police coming. I mean, most times you could tell. I remember once when I was younger, a man ran through my yard, and then another man ran behind him. And my mother said, "Nah, that second one is a police." He was not dressed in any police uniform or anything like that, but we were able to. My mother was clearly able to identify. No, that is a policeman running behind him, and so we're able to identify when we see policemen, even if they're not in uniform. Most times, right? Are there particular rules that govern when you're in a community policing, even if you're off duty? I mean, I imagine that once you take up this badge, you're never really off duty. Right? So are there rules that would govern how you treat with citizens when you're in uniform versus when you're not in uniform?
In terms of if they ask information of you?
Well, if they ask information, if you see something that may be, let's say, considered a crime, or something that might be considered wrong, as the case may be.
So we have seen and heard of reports where police officers would have assisted while off duty in relation to apprehending persons and treating with matters outside of their quote-unquote on duty, but in most cases, we try to encourage officers to call for the support and the backup, because you don't know what you are encountering. So they would give the support if someone, let's say, in whatever situation, somebody out the road and something just happened to them, you'll give the support, but you also have to call for the backup. Because you need that kind of support.
To make sure that people who on duty can be able to register it and everything, and you have other eyes on it besides just you.
And then you're alone. And one of the things that we don't encourage in the organization is one-man patrol. You have to have that support and that backup, because we are very mindful of what we engage out there and the possibility exists, and your family wants you back home. So we really encourage officers, at least 2 persons.
Officers with at least 2 people patrolling at a time.
At least 2 persons patrolling.
What about police officers working privately? I mean, I know that this is a full-time job. As a police officer, it's a full-time job. But in terms of having separate, let's say, security services jobs or things like that, that's something that's allowed in the service?
We have what we call extra duty. an extra duty comes through the office of the commissioner and goes down into the division and that kind of thing. And in stuff like that, for example, somebody, an organization, private company might be doing some work on a building and they need the police to, cordon off the road and that kind of thing. So that's official duty.
Right.
But it's outside of your regular work time.
Right.
And that is fine.
But if it's not come down from the commissioner, is that allowed? Is that I could hire a police officer to work with me?
No, it must be sanctioned by the commissioner of police. Extra duties are sanctioned by the commissioner of police. But even in police officers doing extra duties outside, they also have the opportunity to engage members of the public. Because from time to time, regardless of where they are, sometimes they are by a business place, sometimes they are in a park, or let's say someone having a party and that kind of thing, a fete, and so they engage the police officers. So the police officers also have an opportunity to observe the persons who are coming in there and help. So it's not always, hostile and aggressive.
When they're on this extra duty, I imagine that they would be, using police resources and everything like normal.
And that kind of thing,
Okay, and they would be in uniform.
Yeah.
So if they're not in uniform and they're performing security services, then they're not on...
Well, you see, so there are two different things. There's security service, which you speak of, which we know none of. But
as in the police doesn't you're not allowed to do that? Or?
So remember, the police officers are there to protect and serve.
Right.
That's primarily our function. So, security is a given, because that is what we are there for.
Right.
But to pull it out and say private security is something different. But when you look at the whole community policing philosophy and what it really carries, it means that wherever a police officer is on duty, that you are really a community policing officer doing and carrying out the role and function of the organization.
Nice.
And so what we look at, for example, is where we can help. So, for example, you might be in an event or somewhere and you see that a young person might be exposing jewelry, or they have their cell phone out and that kind of thing. So you can use that opportunity while you are there to just have a word with that young person and say, this is not the safest thing to do. You may be outside on the street and see where the parking is not a good area. So you say to that person, there's not good enough light in here. When you're coming back here, it mightn't be safe. And so it is crime prevention.
Crime prevention.
And community policing and the community policing philosophy is all about crime prevention.
Inspector, unfortunately, we're out of time, and I still have hard questions here. But I know you'll be back with us next week, so I look forward to having this conversation.
It's always a pleasure to be here. Always a pleasure. Thank you
so much for joining us this morning.